Oh, ho, ho. Oh, oh, oh. Yo, oh, oh, in a barrel of rum, everyone. Are you dreaming? Am I dreaming? Perhaps asleep at the wheel and barreling towards an open cliff face? No, but of course not, you silly fools. Instead, it's merely time for another episode of Are You Afraid of the Dork? Starring everyone's favorite whatever the heck I am, me. Welcome to Are You Afraid of the Dork? Season 2, Episode 4, Taking Flight. I'm your heinous host, the one who chatters in the dark, Mr. Dork, and I'm flying in hot with another story sure to liven up your runway and shake up your airport the moment it touches down, assuming my planned trajectory holds steady. Buckle your seats and settle in. Make nice with your seatmates and perhaps pop a pill or two, because all systems are a-go, and we are ready for takeoff. Destination, Mr. Dork's Storytelling Nation. Departure time, right now.
Taking flight. Jade was in no mood to stop and smell the roses. For a start, she was in a car, and so the thought of her stopping to get out and do something so silly when she was supposed to be in the middle of her commute to work was enough to make her break out into a cold sweat. To make a silly hypothetical that much more preposterous, rose bushes weren't even native to her city. The closest one she was aware of was at least 50 miles away. Third of all, she couldn't smell the darn things even if she wanted to. She'd been congested from a particularly bad stress-induced cold going on 3 weeks. Fourthly, the scent of roses made her nauseous, and she wasn't in any mood to make herself feel crappier than she already did. Then there was the unoriginality of it all. Jade had read, watched, and generally come upon more descriptions, depictions, and incidents of people sniffing roses than she cared to count. As far as she was concerned, the roses had been sniffed enough, arguably even too much. And was it even all that healthy for them, for humans to just stick their faces up in their petals? Jade wasn't so sure. Sixth of all, she was allergic, which probably added some poetic subtext to the phrase for Jade, that she was too distracted to unpack while driving. But in any case, her main point still stood. There would be no stopping to smell the roses for her today, or any time soon, possibly ever. As far as she cared, the roses could sniff themselves and keep her out of it. Could sniff each other every moment of every livelong day for what difference it made. Yes, the roses could do with themselves whatever they damn well pleased. It was a free country, after all. Just so long as her nose, and by extension her person, was out of it, and Jade was satisfied. Seventh, frickin' hell, frickin' hell. The drivers in this city. They were certainly something else, Jade thought to herself. Although she figured her second near-miss head-on collision this week was probably as good of a signifier as any, that she was letting herself get a little too stuck in her own head these days. In any case, that was probably enough thinking about roses. For the time had come to turn her mind to more important things, such as her job. Her boring, soul-rending, superficially and very much on paper useful, but actually not, time-sucking, uninspired, socially uneventful job, where she went to immerse herself in muddy pools of office culture and co-workers, which made her feel alienated and misunderstood all day. Joy. Fuck. Was this all there was to life? Where had she gone wrong? She did well in school, attended clubs and the like. Social ones, of course, not the adult social ones. Carefully doled out her time, and she cultivated opportunities in order to get into a good college. She got a degree from said college in a field that was likely to generate a steady stream of income, and, most importantly, denied herself all manner of pleasures of liquid and substance, physical varieties alike, all in the hope that she might eventually be able to carve out a life for herself, in which she finally felt comfortable, unapologetically, just living and existing as a human being. And yet she was still miserable. The whole point of the degree had been to signify she had a good head on her shoulders. She was a careful steward of her time, and a sufficiently motivated and steady worker who could be entrusted with responsibilities. That she not only had value as a human being, but evidently valued herself enough to strive towards and achieve clear and obvious metrics of societal success. And yet after jumping through literal decades worth of hoops, she comes out the other side, only to find that all the ardor she put herself through, all the vomiting before major tests, and the second-guessing herself, and the missed meals, and other sacrifices, but, well, in the eyes of appallingly many, they all counted for next to nothing? How was the justice in that? What was the broader point to what she was now doing, beyond helping herself financially tread water, and staving off starvation? Where was the dignity or hope to be found in scamming others into purchasing products and services they didn't need, just so she could live another day, doing much the same as she had done every day before? Could be found in the rich tapestry of her current workplace culture, what with its poorly telegraphed layoffs and emotionally unintelligent, embittered managers who still talked and operated like it was the 1980s. Or maybe it was in its professed values. Quote, we're all in this together. There's no I in team. Things get better when you do. Believe in yourself. Better together. And other such hackneyed and, within the context of where she worked, blatantly hypocritical sentiments that blurred together in her mind like the uninspired tripe they were. Did the work matter? No! It was all either stupid busy work that should have been automated years ago, or actively detrimental to the world and the vast majority of the people within it, at least from what she could perceive. Perhaps that was part of the reason her workplace was always going through layoffs all the time, because like Jade, customers could tell that the work she was doing wasn't important, and that for as much as management tried to make a case otherwise, it was clear to anyone paying the least bit of attention that the job was uninspired bullshit designed to pad resumes and enrich the small handful of unprincipled assholes who ran the whole thing before it all justifiably came crashing down. God, why the hell did she work here again? Jade increasingly found herself asking this question. She had a good degree, right? She did the right things. So why was she putting up with this nonsense when there were so many other fish in the sea? Was she really so cowardly that all it took was some light verbal abuse and the lingering possibility of a temporary bout of houselessness that incapacitated her principles so? God, she wasn't the person her professor and peers had informed her to be in the slightest. At a glance, she might appear like she had it all together, but Jade knew herself to be just as much of a hack as the bosses she liked to privately bemoan. Why did she have to take her uncle up on his offer? She should have believed in her potential more. She should have been more willing to strike out on her own rather than being so eager to accept the job which her family connections had lined up for her. But having never truly dealt with poverty in any real sense of the word, the possibility of even a light brush with it remained a very pressing threat in Jade's mind. What if she couldn't crack it? She'd certainly heard cautionary tales about other poor unfortunate souls in similar programs to her own, who, through some combination of their lack of social wherewithal and ability to effectively advocate for themselves, wound up working in coffee shops and retail for years upon graduating. What if the transparently soul-rending busy work was really all the Jades of the world were cut out for? Not to mention how awkward it would be for her to go back on this job after all the years she'd already invested. Embarrassingly, especially for one in the position of being a woman, her youth was slipping more and more from her all the time, and with it, any potential sympathy people in her life might have once had for her and her circumstances. Wasn't she firmly in the adult camp now? Shouldn't she have had more figured out by now, and by extension, be more responsible for the undesirable outcomes of her decisions than ever? God, she was so terribly weak, yet this was the version of herself she had to work with. For as underwhelming as she was, for as much as she could recognize her flaws, this was her, and there was no escaping it. And somehow, this reality terrified Jade most of all. The prospect of being a slave to her own mediocrity, having no good way forward or out. At least, not any way she was brave enough to take. Oh darn, here was her turn. It wouldn't be long now until she was in the thick of it once more, walking into that same familiar building for another 10-hour shift, sometimes more, of dull nothingness. These days, whenever people asked her what she did, Jade just ignored the question and changed the topic. Had they noticed, it might have been rude, but Jade found most people didn't. Besides, even supposing they were just being polite, conversations were less depressing this way. Her parents claimed she didn't plan, but Jade had it all figured out. Sooner or later, her place of employment would go under, and then of course she would lose all of her references from the last 7 years. And then for good measure, a healthy chunk of her retirement savings would be reduced to crap. And if that wasn't enough, she'd probably struggle to find a job anywhere for several months due to the suspicious multi-year resume activity gap. And then she'd fall behind on all her living payments, have to move back in with her parents in her 30s, and naturally her college debts would swallow her whole again, only this time she'd never be able to claw herself out. And her balances would all be in the negatives, and her work experiences would count for nothing, and she'd never be loved or cared for by anyone else ever going forward due to all the unfortunate baggage she would be saddled with until she died. The end. Jade thought it was a great plan. Her therapist was less amused and failed to see the humor in it all, but she maintained it was there. Perhaps you just needed to be in the right headspace to see it. Well, here it was. Jade pulled into the parking lot, in all its generic concrete majesty. She was half joking, but half not. She didn't know how to make a parking lot. She didn't know how to do most practical things. Truthfully, didn't know how to do most anything at all. Jade spent her days following the orders of people she didn't respect to advance matters she didn't see the point of. For all she knew, the completion of a parking lot could very well be a point of pride for some construction workers, and worth marveling at in its own right once done. If nothing else, it was something real, something which tangibly changed the world for the something or another, which by definition made it more valuable than nothing, which was to say, more valuable than Jade. Fortunately, what with it being a digitally focused world and everything, Jade didn't need to carry much beyond what was already preloaded on her work computer. Or in her case, anything at all most days. But she still liked to take mental inventories of things before and after driving to work to gauge just how screwed she'd be on the day to come. Pleasantly surprised by her own attentiveness, everything seemed to be just as in order today as it had been 100 work days prior. But sure enough, Jade knew that she would go through this ritual tomorrow, just the same. Now, truly all that remained was the death march to the dreaded rectangular building just across the lot. Soon enough, the day would be over, just like everyone that came before it, and at this thought, it felt as though a weight was lifted off her shoulders, and another heavier one were applied simultaneously. But before Jade could step more than a few feet towards her destination, she couldn't help but notice that her feet were no longer making contact with the ground. Strangely, the earth beneath her was slowly getting farther and farther away. Oh great, I finally cracked, and I suppose now's finally time for my psychotic episode, Jade mused to herself. This doesn't bode well for my health insurance premiums at all. And then, as if right on cue, chiming up from stage right, one of her co-workers spoke. Oh my god, Jade, you're flying! This isn't a dream, and you're really flying. It was none other than Danny, a nice young Hispanic woman with curly black hair and a trim athletic frame, who Jade always felt guilty about never getting to know more about, despite how long they'd worked together. Though given that she was still drifting skyward / descending further into madness, unlike all the time she'd said as much before, it was perhaps well and truly too late for that now. Now 12 feet up and counting, Jade sheepishly avoided eye contact, feigned a yawn, and politely shook her head as her cheeks flushed slightly with embarrassment. With all due respect, I'm definitely dreaming right now. Oh, and good luck with your presentation today. Turning her attention to the open skies, Jade tried to propel herself towards a nearby cloud bank, seeing if her body would comply. To her pleasant surprise, it did. It would seem this was one of those lucid dreams she had heard so much about. Kind of fun and a pleasant surprise to find she was still in bed now, and thus had that much more time to mentally prep for work. But it was still kind of a bummer how so much of it from earlier had been dedicated to worrying. And not even patently absurd dreamlike concerns that she would wake up to and shake her head at, but stuff that bothered her in reality as well. There were other odd things about Jade's dream. For instance, the air rushing past her face felt surprisingly realistic, and whatever was going on with insides seemed to be making her slightly nauseous. It was almost as though her body were physically hurtling through the air at a speed comparable to a car roaming down the freeway. But then again... it was certainly taking her a while to arrive in that cloud bank. Usually in lucid dreams, when you wanted something, it tended to be granted to you fairly instantaneously. Almost as though... Jade was a sight to behold. From her now severely fraying untidy hair flying into her eyes and every other place, to the look of abject horror now plastered on her face stiffer than waxwork, to her arms and legs flailing about like the noodle-like and non-aerodynamic appendages the G-force reduced them to. For quite possibly the first time in Jade's life, she was majestic in her own right. "I'm going to die," Jade proclaimed to no one in particular. "I'm going to die," Jade proclaimed louder. For you must understand, she was very high up by now, 4,602 feet over the nearest bit of ground, to be precise, and so she was going to be heard at all at the speed she was going, and raising the volume of her voice was perhaps one potential, albeit largely ineffectual, way of going about it. At first, Jade's mind turned only to what would become of her when she touched down on the ground, and what a grotesque little pavement stain she'd make, and then to what might become of her supposing she survived her landing, and how the government would likely detain and dissect her corpse in service to science. And then to how she was self-conscious enough about her body without all its bits and pieces, folds and floppy bits, jostling about in the wind, and her clothes barely struggling to maintain their basic shape and fit amidst all the atmospheric pressures acting upon them for all the world to see. And lastly, to her job, and how she was primed to be very, very late, supposing this whole thing managed to pass without incident. Even now, put into these most bizarre of circumstances, Jade was finding herself on the verge of a hernia, a heart attack, and then some. But then something weird happened. Something so out of character as to be borderline miraculous. Jade stopped worrying about all the terrible things, both real and projected, that could cause her life to come crashing down at any moment, and just listened to the flow of the air rushing past her. And she observed the trees gently swaying far down below, and all the people in places that she thought she knew, far away, but now appearing before her in a manner she had never seen before. It was beautiful to see how all the rolling hills and roaring rivers and eclectic architecture came together in such a rich and unexpected tapestry, so brimming with life and ingenuity and novelty, like she had never realized. And the longer she flew, the more in control Jade began to feel, until she could control her speed, direct herself this way and that, and go where she pleased with all the ease and grace of a great bird in its natural element. And after the many exuberant hours that followed, Jade finally did touch down. She found the world a very different place than when she'd left it, and she was amazed to find the world much more accommodating and accepting of the new her than she ever believed possible. They played back the footage of snippets which only ever captured a small fraction of what she'd experienced. It almost always compelled them afterwards to gaze upon her in wonderment. Truly, there was far more goodness in the world than she had once realized. Truly, there was far more to her life than she had long believed. And it struck her as ironic that far more than the act of flying itself, the thing that resonated with Jane the deepest was this newfound appreciation for her potential and the very real possibilities life offered. And while Jade's powers of flight never awakened in her again after that first takeoff, much to the disappointment of the media and other parties who clamored to know how she did it, in truth, this was okay, because something else had awakened in her. And so, sensing herself on the verge of a great new chapter of her life, Jade never returned to her old workplace again. Precisely 1 week later, Rose clocked in. The end.
Wait, huh? I'm confused. It's my own story, and I'm still confused. Who's Rose? What do they have to do with... Not the flower, I don't think. There weren't any talking flowers in this one, insofar as I'm aware. So then, is it Jade's replacement? Is the implication they found a replacement within a week, despite how much she agonized over her old workplace? Like she was torturing herself with worry for years, for an entity that literally just saw her as an easily interchangeable part. Or perhaps, is Rose Jade? As in, like, perhaps a reinvention or renaming of themselves? Well, that would be even more depressing, right? What does it mean for one to attempt to reinvent themselves, only for them to return to the very thing they were doing, and was in large part making them so miserable a week later? Aren't stories where bored office workers have grand epiphanies which lead to a new lease on life supposed to result in them quitting and moving on to bigger and better things? Maybe pursuing unrealized passions, perhaps prioritizing the sorts of positive relationships with themselves and others in manners which they've always known in the back of their mind would be better for them, and yet been too scared to unapologetically pursue before. Am I wrong? Am I crazy here? I swear, this is not how it works, right? There's usually something more, isn't there? So why don't we? Now why don't I? There should be more, right? More of an ending, more clarity into what became of the character, or even what insight they gleaned from their time in the story in the first place. And yet, they, whose existence so utterly depends upon us, they, who entirely ceases to be without our attention, failed to let us know all. See every little thought which came about from a transformative moment in their life. It's... And yet some part of me wonders if this was perhaps the point. It seems I've got a lot to think about. This has been your heinous host, Mr. Dork, and I'm signing off until next week. Remember to wash your face and look both ways before crossing the street, but never at the same time.